Well, hi there. Recently, I had the enormous privilege of spending 2 weeks deep in the Peruvian Amazon. And we spent those 2 weeks documenting every reptile and amphibian that we could find, as well as some pretty unbelievable arthropods. But of all the incredible and unforgettable creatures that we saw, one of the most amazing was this, the giant monkey frog. Also known as the giant leaf frog, bicolor tree frog, waxy monkey tree frog, or simply by its scientific name, Philomedusa bicolor. No matter what you call it, this is one incredible frog. I just love them. I mean, look at those hands. They're like big, fat, green, four-fingered baby hands. They're so chunky. It's just magical. The whole frog is just enormous. And they not only look cool, but they have exceedingly cool personalities. I saw the coolest frogs that I have ever seen in Peru, but giant monkey frogs and cane toads are the two that absolutely stole my heart. I adore them. But do they make good pets? Can I even get one? And is the giant monkey frog the best pet amphibian for you? Well, fortunately, unbelievably fortunately, the first people to breed the Peruvian bicolors and to produce second generation Peruvian bicolors are Chris Hansbrough and his genetically identical brother Brian from Gecko Daddy. Yes, the same Gecko Daddy that produces the most incredible leopard geckos that I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, look at these things. Have you ever seen colors like these before in your whole life? And Chris is here to help us give these enormous, adorable, personable frogs a score based on our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, I really want to give these guys a 5. They are so amazing to handle, and they're so easy to handle. They're like White's tree frogs, but less likely to jump, less inclined to try to eat you, and so much more satisfying. And that's not a knock on White's tree frogs, they're amazing. Really, these are more like red-eyed tree frogs to handle, but we haven't even done a video on those yet. Gecko Daddy does breed them though, if you're in the market. And I say more like red-eyed tree frogs, but I don't say exactly like red-eyed tree frogs because these are so much muchier. They're huge and delightful. Honestly, for the most part, handling a frog is something that you can do. Afterwards, you can say that you held a frog. It was wet, cold, slippery, and unsatisfying. Plus, it's dangerous for the frog and in some cases, slightly dangerous for you. Something you can do, but why would you really? I have a pair of White's tree frogs. I enjoy them more than I ever would have imagined. I never hold them. But these are the most satisfying frogs I have ever handled. And I'm referring to wild individuals we caught in Peru. These are captive bred. They're accustomed to people, and they're unreal. More than anything, it's their hands and the way they climb, but don't really jump, that really sets them apart. Those hands, they've been burned on my mind for almost a year now. They're so thick and strong and squishy. Giant tree frogs are heavy, and they need disproportionately powerful hands to live that tree frog life. Their size is also probably a big factor as to why they're so careful in their movements. They don't just leap into space like a rocket tree frog. Falls can be nasty when you're this big. Just take your time, but just look at those hands. I so want to give them a 5. But I can't. I can't give them a 5. They're still frogs, and their skin absorbs chemicals, pathogens, and whatever else might be on your hands. So you have to have either extremely clean and chemical-free hands or clean gloves when handling them. That is exceedingly important. And gloves might be the smart route because they're also very poisonous. How poisonous? I don't know. But their parotoid glands, the poison glands behind the ears on some frogs and toads, are enormous. The biggest I have ever seen, both in total size and in proportion to the size of the frog. They go all the way down their back on both sides. They're just huge. You don't want that getting in your mouth or eyes. How bad would it be? I don't even know. But I have to give them a 4 out of 5 for handleability. There's probably a reason that frogs only have 4 fingers. That said, these and cane toads are the only frogs I have ever handled that were totally worth handling. Just do it safely, both for you and for the frog. I'd like to take a moment just to say thank you to our patrons at Patreon and to invite you to check out our Patreon and consider supporting us. Our trip to the Amazon to discover what is there was unbelievable. And I think the videos that we brought back were pretty amazing as well. I'm so grateful that we got to share that with you guys. But I will tell you, trips like that don't make any economic sense for us. But I really want to go because there are so many places full of who knows what that I want to share with you guys in the future. And if you would like to see that, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Now let's talk about care. And I can think of no one on this entire planet better to talk to us about care than Chris Hansbrough. From Gecko Daddy, who has been keeping and breeding these amazing frogs for years now. Thank you so much for being here for one thing. And thanks for showing off these incredible frogs.
My pleasure.
Suppose someone like say me, wanted the most incredible tree frogs I've ever seen in my life. What would I need to know to keep these successfully?
Well, first of all, they're going to get big.
Yeah.
Right? Giant monkey frog lives up to its name. So even when you're starting out with something small like these guys here, within a year, you're going to be pretty close to that size with the proper care. So if you're starting out with something small, you're going to get something more appropriate for that size frog. Mm-hmm. But as it grows, at some point, you're going to advance your setup to a much larger setup.
And you were telling me with these guys, with the froglets, it's best to go pretty simple.
Yeah, I keep these with a paper towel substrate.
Okay.
Keep it damp, a shallow water dish, a climbing structure like this, and a well-ventilated cage at the top.
Okay.
The monkey frog is a high canopy frog. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you found them down low is wonderful when you were in Peru.
The only places we were finding them was really when I think they were coming down to spawn over the water.
Yeah. So in fact, rarely do you find females imported from the wild because females rarely come down that low. Mm-hmm. And even their nests are 10 or more feet in some cases above the water.
I think the only female we found, she was in amplexus when she was found.
Oh, awesome.
So
they're going to need a pretty large cage. And when I say large, probably elevations. You're talking about a tall tank because they do want to go up.
Okay. So I can think of some tanks. I was talking to you a little bit earlier. There's like a 36 by 36 by 18. Mm-hmm. You said that would probably work, but I agree with you. That'd be tight. Even that's a big enclosure.
Yeah. And it would
bigger
work,
would be better.
It would work well for one.
Okay.
But if you can manage larger, even better.
Makes perfect sense to this. Yeah. So something pretty simple. At this size, something bioactive?
Yeah, you can go bioactive. Really, I think one of the biggest issues is feeding. Mm-hmm. When you have small froglets and you're trying to feed them,
yes,
it's a matter of them hunting because they do hunt at night. Mm-hmm. They're going to sit still like this. Whenever there's lights on, they're sitting still. But at night, once the lights go out, they are cruising around looking for stuff to put in their mouths with their big hands.
When I was in college, I had a red-eyed tree frog. I also had green tree frogs. They were easy to feed. Yeah. You'd see them shooting across the tank. As soon as you put food in there, they were going. But the red-eyed tree frog, I rarely saw it awake.
Yeah.
I saw it eat one time.
Yep.
These guys, it might be a little bit harder to get to see them eat, though if they're anything like the dumpy frogs, they're voracious.
Yeah. So at this size, they're fed in groups, and so we don't get to see them eat. But as they get older, I would say in the next 3 to 4 months, and feeding them with tongs and one at a time, and that way I can make sure everybody gets food.
That's how I feed my white tree frogs.
Yeah, and that's how these are fed.
What kind of food are we talking about for these guys, and then for adults?
The smaller ones will start off at 1/4-inch crickets.
Okay.
Out of the water. And the way that you determine the food size is by the space between their eyes. Mm. So if it can fit between their eyes, then it can fit down their throat.
Frogs are very ambitious.
And they're mostly stomach down below that. So whatever they can do. And I've seen these guys, if a larger cricket is put in the tank, I've seen them grab a hold of a larger cricket and they'll just sit there with the back legs hanging out of their mouth until they can
digest enough of it.
Yeah. So they're all mouth and stomach, and they're pretty aggressive at feeding. These will be fed twice a week.
Okay.
Large insect prey.
Like a dubia roach.
Like a dubia roach.
Which is another good one to feed with tongs because that'll be gone in your bioactive enclosure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feed everybody at this size individually.
That's awesome. So smaller crickets, about how often?
I feed these every other night, or when, you can tell the size of their bellies if they need food.
Yeah, it's interesting because are these all about the same age?
Yeah.
And so you can see some size difference. Some of them are a little bit better at getting their meals than others.
Yeah. Which also is an important point about males, the difference between males and females. Mm-hmm. You'll tell, at about a year old, the females will start to advance in size over the males.
Are there nuptial pads or anything else you can use to distinguish them? How early can you tell if they're male or female?
It's going to be about 14 to 18 months old. Or at least when you see the barometric pressure change outside and the rains are coming, then you'll see the males develop those nuptial pads.
Well, it sounds like the care on these frogs is not complicated. It's sort of typical tree frog care.
Yeah, I'd say it's because of the size, it's probably
just on a greater scale.
Yeah.
Anything else unusual about their care?
No, I don't think so. Having a nice perch for them is a great way to view them. Mm-hmm. They do perch. They do like sunlight. One interesting thing I've noticed is these guys will go up into my enclosure, which has direct sunlight into there. And I have used the temp gun on these at 110 degrees.
Wow, that seems very high for frog. And you need to be careful if you have a smaller enclosure. You definitely don't want it to be where they can't get out.
The temperatures I would keep these guys at this size is in the 70s.
Yeah. Because amphibians can overheat.
The wax that they put on their skin, though, is
to defend against UVB.
Yeah, it keeps the moisture in.
Oh, yeah.
And so they can handle pretty good temperatures.
Well, that seems very, very reasonable. So I think overall, we are going to give them a 4 out of 5 for care. They're still going to need regular misting, but lighting and temperatures are pretty easy.
Yep.
Feeding is really, really easy. And so, more than anything, you need a big enclosure and you need to keep humidity right.
Yep.
And those seem to be about the only things that are difficult at all.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that awesome explanation of their care. I have been to Gecko Daddy's rain chamber that they have set up for these frogs, and it is amazing. When it comes to hardiness, we give these giant monkey frogs a score of 4 out of 5. This is a big hardy frog if and only if you get captive bred individuals that were bred here in the United States. Sometimes you're going to find them that claim to be captive bred that were actually bred, well, not even bred, they were bred in the wild. The eggs were collected in the wild and the farm babies were shipped here to the United States and reported as captive bred. They're not, and those frogs are very, very unlikely to survive. But if you get actually captive bred frogs, like the ones you can get from Gecko Daddy, they are pretty darn hardy. But they are frogs, and frogs are susceptible to a number of things that can place their health and survival in jeopardy, even if they're captive bred. They are particularly susceptible to chemicals, fungal, bacterial, and other pathogens that they can absorb through their skins. You need to be very careful about anything that comes into contact with them because it can easily get into them. This means that your hands need to be clean and chemical free. You need to be very careful about the water you use to mist them, etc. On top of that, frogs are susceptible to desiccation and overheating. You don't want things to be overly stagnant, but you do want humidity to be high. What I'm saying is that frogs have some issues with hardiness, but this is a pretty hardy frog. When it comes to availability, we give the giant monkey frog a score of 2 out of 5. I've only seen them in person in 2 places, the Amazon rainforest and at Gecko Daddy. Don't expect to see them at pet stores or at expos generally. That said, you can generally find them online if you know where to look. Imported adults and babies are often available, but I wouldn't recommend getting them for a number of reasons that we actually outline in this video. But there are a few breeders that seem to produce them. Now, for the most part, they are the Suriname locality. These are from the Peruvian locality, which have a much more reticulated or net-like pattern on their sides than does the Suriname population. Some people have suggested that they should be classified as a different species entirely, Philomedusa reticulata. If you want one of these, and I do, I only know of one place that you can go, at least to get them captive bred, which is the only way to do it. Gecko Daddy. Though as their babies are growing up, other breeders may start producing them as well. So if you want one, we'll have a link to Gecko Daddy's website in the description. When it comes to upfront costs, we give the giant monkey frog a score of 3 out of 5. This isn't the cheapest frog. That said, it isn't a crazy expensive pet either. It's hard to find a morph ball python that costs less than these frogs, and these are way more unusual than morph ball pythons. Everything else will not be insanely expensive, but this is a very big tree frog. They don't leap much, but if you give them a lot of space, they will use it. Zoomed and Exoterra both have some rad enclosures that measure about 3 feet by 3 feet by 18 inches. You could probably get away with something about this size, but pets are much more fun when you can observe them in a space that allows them to move around and explore. If you can provide something bigger, they will probably use that space as well. It is best to keep froglets in fairly simple enclosures, but as adults, you can keep them in epic bioactive enclosures. You'll just need the right substrates and some live plants, as well as springtails and isopods. Make sure to have a large water bowl or other places where they have access to water, water conditioner, and some way to mist, like a water bottle or a misting system. And that's about it. Lights are for the plants mostly, though low intensity UVB would probably be beneficial. And after that, you're done. They're not as cheap as smaller, less expensive frogs, but for one of the most amazing frogs in the entire world, it's pretty reasonable. And that is why, overall, we give the giant monkey frog a score of 3.4 out of 5. If what you want is one of the largest, most beautiful, laid-back, and fascinating tree frogs in the entire world, then the giant monkey frog might be the best pet amphibian for you. And if you want the reticulated Peruvian locality, then Gecko Daddy is the place to go. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. But I really think frogs, they just can't get a 5, and that's probably why they only have 4 fingers.
Was that improv? The fingers?
Yeah.
Love it.